In this segment, we're going to talk about one of the sort of lingering problems with the word embedding technique from the standpoint of bias and fairness. So the way that we train word embeddings is we take some very large corpus, usually as much data as we can get, so basically as kind of text from the web in whatever language we want to deal with. But the problem is that this text is not neutral or somehow drawn from some underlying distribution that is just kind of linguistically pure, right? This data encodes biases about the real world, and the concern from the standpoint of word embeddings is that we are at a very early stage in our NLP pipeline encoding those biases into our model. So let's talk about what that kind of means. One way we can analyze this is we could take the words she and he and look for them in our vector space and take the difference between them. And what this finds is an axis that should roughly correspond to notions of binary gender here, if we are kind of just looking at these two genders. And we can look at words that are most heavily associated with she and most heavily associated with he, and we find that the occupations, once we filter these words to just be occupations, kind of reflect stereotypes about what historically men and women have tended to do in society. For example, homemaker is one of the most extreme she occupations. And we can find similar things for kind of race and religion as well. So these models kind of encode these associations based on the data, which it shouldn't be surprising if you think about, well, okay, maybe this is just scraping data from newspapers, right? And a lot of newspaper articles are talking about what jobs people had in the 1980s, right? If it's data that's a little bit older, and it's naturally going to have these kinds of biases. So there's some of this work that first of all, it assumes a gender binary here, so it kind of doesn't fully handle this problem, certainly, but they tried to at least take a crack at debiasing by looking at this she-he axis and other gendered words like woman and man, and identifying this, this kind of thick line here that they said roughly corresponded to the, the axis of gendering these things. Then what they did is they took words like homemaker, they projected them onto this subspace, and then they subtracted off that projection from the words, from the original word embedding. So find this new embedding, homemaker prime. And so you notice that this is kind of centered homemaker now along this axis. And of course, this is a much higher dimensional space than 2 dimensions, so the picture looks a little bit different. But the idea is to take all these words that we think or we don't want our model to associate with particular gender and kind of bring them back to the middle here. This is a nice technique. It doesn't work. There's some results from this, but the problem is that in these word embedding spaces, everything is kind of tied up together, right? It's not just about where the occupation words lie, but it's about, where homemaker lies with respect to child or caring or something like that. And, when you do even when you kind of do this process, you still end up with other dimensions of meaning that are kind of reflecting this bias and these differences. And so the bias is not just this kind of local thing that we can get rid of, but instead it's a kind of pervasive property of the space that's very hard to scrub from our data. And so this is a major ongoing challenge in NLP. There's no easy answers for it. If we need to train on large-scale text corpora, there's no way we can get ones that kind of don't reflect bias somehow. And so there's work on both improving this from the standpoint of pre-trained models and things like word embeddings, improving it in our kind of final downstream classifiers by thinking about how to evaluate it and how to kind of correct for it, even if it does exist in the embeddings. But it's a major ongoing area of research that we don't have many standard techniques in the repertoire for yet. That's the end of this segment.